Welcome to the Feeling Better podcast. My name is Maria, and I'm the host of this podcast, former gambling addict and devoted Christian homesteading wife. I'm also the author of the Feeling Better 10-4 program that teaches you a practical, effective, inspirational 10-week program to help you overcome your compulsive gambling addiction, which you can listen to in the first 15 episodes of my podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey folks, I'm interjecting here with a huge apology for not uploading a podcast episode last Sunday. Thank you all for the emails and checking in on me or dropping me a line to say hello. In case you can't tell from my voice, I came down with some kind of crud that's been going around. I think at first it was the flu because I had a fever and all of the awful body aches and chills that come with it. I literally slept for 4 days under a fog of delirium and NyQuil. And then when I emerged, it all morphed into some kind of head cold. I barely had the strength to even eat and take an occasional bath, let alone the ability to edit my audio recording. But at least now I'm vertical, so there's that. Now on to the recorded part of my audio.
I hope you all had an amazing Thanksgiving. Want to hear a crazy story about my Thanksgiving? I'd previously mentioned that we had all the fixins for a really nice Thanksgiving supper. I'd spent most of Wednesday preparing things ahead of time. But I also mentioned that I'd been interviewing for a job. It wasn't the perfect job by any means, but it paid well and it had benefits, and it was remote out of my home. Over the course of the last few weeks, I had 4 rounds of interviews with them. The last round was the Friday before Thanksgiving week. The Zoom invite came in through email and it was labeled Maria's Final Interview. I thought the 4th round was just going to be a formality at this point, but it was actually pretty intensive. It lasted an hour, and the executive manager that interviewed me had several in-depth questions that, honestly, I felt I answered really well. In nearly every way, I was a terrific fit for the role they were hiring for. When Monday came around, I felt a bit nervous, but was super confident that I would get the job. They were actually hiring 2 salespeople. So even though I might not have been the top choice, I was sure I'd be getting an offer letter within a day or 2. But I got an email late Monday afternoon from the hiring manager letting me know that because of the holiday and the short week, they wouldn't be making a decision until the following week. Decision? Yeah, that wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear. I'd thought by now that they already made a decision and just needed to put all the pieces together for my formal offer. I mean, after all, it was 4 rounds that I'd completed. So that kind of stunk. But it was Thanksgiving week, and so I'd focus on that now that I could postpone my anxiousness about the job. Then that Wednesday afternoon, as I was putting together all the ingredients for my green bean casserole, I sat down to take a break and check my email. There I saw an email from the hiring manager. Amazing! They'd been able to make a decision sooner, and now I'd have something to really celebrate for the holiday. Or so I thought. When I opened up the email and read his words, my heart sank. We appreciate the time and effort, but unfortunately decided to go in a different direction. Best of luck to you. What? Are you kidding me? 4 intensive rounds in the interview process, and I got nothing more than a, "Sorry, we decided to go in a different direction" email? My hubby and I had prayed and prayed over this situation. He was so sure that I was going to get it. Even he was stunned when I read him the email. "What kind of company does that?" he asked. "Well, one that I wasn't meant to work for, obviously," I replied. And that was honestly the truth of it. I had just prayed the day before, asking God this: "Lord, can you help me to trust you, please? Please shut any doors in my life you don't want open, and open any doors that you want me to go through. Light my path and help direct me, because I honestly can't even see past the next hour. You're the one who knows what's best for me." I did trust in that prayer, of course. There was clearly something about that job that God didn't want for me. Still, despite knowing that, it totally discouraged me. For the zillionth time, I am so weary of juggling bills and stressing over money. I just needed to earn some income. Week by week, we live on his daily bread, barely hanging on by the skin of our teeth. I feel like the Israelites in the wilderness, relying totally on him. I don't want to question his purpose or plan for me, and I don't want to be like the Israelites who insisted on some meat, even though they were being sustained by his manna. See Exodus chapter 16 for that story. I was human, though, and I couldn't help but to be disappointed. You might remember from my earlier episode that one of the lessons God has been teaching me is to not feel happiness based on my circumstances, but rather to feel contentment and joy in all things, whether in times of plenty or scarcity, in times of good and bad. Yet the thought of having to go back to the drawing board, submitting applications and job hunting all over again just depressed me. Not to mention, I know our winter property taxes are coming up. And forget Christmas gifts. This is the second year where neither of us will be buying Christmas gifts for each other. Not a single thing on Black Friday was purchased, and probably not a single thing over the Christmas holiday will be purchased either. Even though the weather has turned icy cold, I still love to go outside at night all bundled up and pray to God. So Wednesday night, I put on my winter coat and stepped out into the front yard, meandering around the property while I talked to God. Lord, I prayed earnestly, can you please help me to feel overflowing with thanks and gratitude? Can you pretty please remove this discouragement and frustration that I'm feeling? I know I have many blessings in my life to be thankful for, but I can't see past the worry and disappointment. Can you please fill me with wisdom and your spirit so that I may properly celebrate Thanksgiving tomorrow? I've said it before several times. God does speak to us. Not audibly, but in that still small voice in our center, deep in our core. The words just appear in your mind and they're impossible to ignore. God spoke to me then, at that moment, about what to do for Thanksgiving. I want you to fast tomorrow, God said to me. I stopped in my tracks. Wait, what? Did you just say fast? I know he did, and I laughed then. Not an amused kind of laugh, but more like a you can't be serious sort of laugh. I mean, I had a 15-pound turkey thawed in my fridge, ready to be roasted. I had all the pies and the green bean casserole and the cranberry jelly already made. All the fixins were prepared and everything was set to go. Thursday was supposed to be a feast, not a fast. But I knew that's what he said. Even though it was just going to be my hubby and me, my plan was to get up and after my morning coffee and Bible reading, get moving on all the cooking and baking and heating and roasting. Yet, God was telling me to set aside all of that preparing and feasting, and instead spend the day in prayer and contemplation of the past year and all of the lessons that he taught me in 2023. Wow, okay. Not exactly the answer I'd been expecting or even hoping for, but I knew what he was asking. Now to break the news to my hubby. I went inside the house, put my coat away, and walked into the living room. So, yeah, I said casually, as if I were about to talk about the weather. How would you feel about moving Thanksgiving to Friday instead of having the big dinner tomorrow? I asked him. He turned to look at me, utterly confused. But when I explained it all to him, he just shrugged. Sure, he said, I'll fast with you. No big deal. So that's what we did. Everything stayed in the fridge uncooked and unbaked. Instead of spending the day cooking and then feasting, I spent the day fasting and leisurely doing housework and chores while listening to sermons. I mentioned before that I have a running YouTube playlist, and on Thursday, I listened to at least 8 or 9 of them in a row. I also played worship music, And I dug through my Audible library to pull out an audiobook that I once bought but never listened to. It's called Sacred Marriage by Gary Thomas. Even though my marriage has never been stronger or more steeped in God, I still wanted to always continue to grow and be more Christ-like. One of the ways I knew I could improve was being a better wife. Well, not a better wife as in gambling, but better as in loving, forgiving, and nurturing. That book was exactly what I needed, and I probably wouldn't have listened to it or any of the sermons had I continued with my cooking and preparation that day. Even though the book is about marriage, it's also very much about our relationship with God and how to love like Him. One of the most valuable things it taught me is that we can have all the obedience in the world, all the faith in God, all the service to our church and family and friends, and all the selfless actions towards those we love. But if we have the wrong attitude, it spoils everything. What good was my faith, my love, my trust in God if I walked around grumbling and fearful and disappointed and worrying? How strong of a Christ follower was I if I loved on my husband and took care of my household, but filled my home's atmosphere with griping and negativity and uncertainty? My marriage and my relationship with my hubby was a precious, precious thing, and I knew God chose me to be His wife, to care for Him and to be His partner. And the reality was, there wasn't much faith in saying I trusted God's plan for me if I said those words but didn't truly believe it. I got about a third of the way through the book before I went to bed Thanksgiving night, and Friday, I spent a perfectly joyful, totally contented day filled with true gratitude for all of my blessings. I was so glad that God made me wait one day. It made all the difference. Anyway, in today's episode, I'm going to be reading from my new book, Imbalances, The Addict's Guide to Fixing Our Broken Lives, and today is Chapter 7, The Imbalance of Trust, Sex, and Intimacy. This one is such a difficult topic to broach because I think it's one of the biggest ways in which our modern society is so broken. This imbalance is so commonplace and so ubiquitous that no one, not even Christians, can identify or discern the ways in which Satan has infiltrated this part of our lives. There is no longer any reverence or specialness or respect for sexuality. I mean, just take the subject of pornography. It's everywhere, and it's so easily accessible and acceptable. I know porn has been around for a long time, but it used to be, back when I was a kid, kind of a taboo thing. You could only find it in magazines or videotapes, or by paying for a special subscription to the Playboy channel on cable. And no one ever talked about it out in the open or would admit that they even engaged in pornography. Yet today, to the young generations who grew up with the internet, pornography and sexual images and sexual content have always been something commonplace that's easily seen and found anywhere. You guys want to hear a funny, not so funny story? We'll start this episode with a little anecdote from my teenage years. So, by now, you all know my childhood. I was born and raised a Muslim with a super strict father. He carefully monitored all the clothes I wore, and I wasn't even allowed to get phone calls from a boy. He didn't even like it when I had celebrity crushes or put up posters of actors on my bedroom wall. Whenever we went on vacation, I was never allowed to meet with or make friends with any boys. I'm quite sure that my father hated it that I went to a co-ed public school. For a brief moment, when I finished 8th grade, my parents contemplated putting me in an all-girls high school to keep me away from boys. But the only schools like that were Catholic ones. And so I suppose my father thought that sending me to a public high school with boys was only slightly better than sending me to a Catholic high school where they taught religion. But still, I know there was a part of him that wanted to be there with me at school, making sure that I didn't talk to any boys and watching over me like a hawk. I wasn't even allowed to take gym class. Yeah, my parents kept me out of it with a religious exemption. Not joking. No gym for me in high school. As a result, I was a girl who immersed myself in the escape of books. I loved books. I read incessantly, utilizing the library as much as possible because I didn't have much money to buy books. When I was 16, my parents declared that they were no longer going to give me any incidental money for books, clothes, cassette tapes, makeup, or whatever else I wanted as a teenage girl. The few bucks I made babysitting wasn't cutting it, so they finally agreed to let me get a job to work after school and on weekends. The very first place I ever worked at was a small Italian family-owned shoe store, which was a lot of fun. I mean, what teenage girl doesn't love shoes? But the owner was a creepy old pedophile who was always trying to feel me up. For real. One of the other girls who worked there with me actually filed a sexual harassment lawsuit against him, and she and her mother came to me asking me to testify, but I refused. I was never really harmed, thank God. I always managed to somehow escape his prowling sneak attacks on me. Even though I knew this man deserved some serious penalties for preying on us underage girls, I also had the fear that my father would probably somehow think it was my fault. In my mind, I didn't want to risk his wrath by telling my parents about the situation, which I knew I'd have to do if I agreed to go to court. Looking back, that was silly, of course. I'm sure my father probably would have torn that guy to shreds. But he also had some seriously strict mindsets about my chastity, and so my concerns that he might ship me off to the Middle East to go live with relatives was a valid one. I didn't want to risk that, so I kept it all hush-hush. I lasted about 2 years there before deciding that my best course of action was to just quit and find something else. So naturally, when I saw an ad in the local newspaper, which is how we found jobs back then, for a part-time position at the small bookstore only a couple miles from our home, I eagerly applied. I mean, hello, I adored books and was an avid reader. Working at a bookstore was a dream come true for me. During the interview, the manager, a woman, asked me, "Do you have any problem working in a place that sells adult content, meaning books, magazines, and videotapes?" Me, in my total sheltered naivete, thought she was talking about, stuff that older people read. I mean, I was only 18. I figured she was talking about Shakespeare or Kurt Vonnegut and Stephen King. I had zero understanding whatsoever that she was talking about pornography. But she didn't know that. She simply nodded when I eagerly told her it was no problem at all and invited me to start work that next week. Well, I found out pretty quickly on my first day what adult content really meant. The bookstore had this little back room behind wooden swinging doors, like an old-time saloon, that had several racks of magazines and multiple shelves of videotapes. It had been ridiculously unnerving and embarrassing for me at first, having to ring up these middle-aged guys with their porn mags and video rentals, or having to straighten the shelves and put things back in order at the end of the night. But eventually, I got used to it and became desensitized to it. Of course, I never told my father. My parents never once came to visit me at work. They weren't big readers, and they had full-time jobs and other kids and very little time on their hands. They were just happy I was making some money and able to pay for my own stuff. Isn't that so hilarious? I mean, there I was, living under the very strict rule of my father, who didn't even want me talking to boys on the phone or dating for fear I'd be exposed and compromised to the sexual immorality that America was so immersed in. And yet, right under his nose, without him even knowing about it, his teenage daughter spent her evenings and weekends working in a porn shop. But I didn't want to quit because I was able to get so many books for cheap, sometimes even for free. And I really loved having discussions with the real customers who were readers, chatting with them about bestsellers and new authors. Plus, it paid really good for a part-time high school job. It was a strange place to work, to be sure, and I still, to this day, look back incredulously at the fact that I was a senior in high school who worked at a porn shop. How I wasn't more popular with the boys is a complete mystery. I'm totally joking, of course. I only lasted there about a year, though. Eventually, I just got too grossed out. It was not the place for an 18-year-old to work, and I was a pretty young thing at that age, and too many of the men who came in were total creepers. I'll never forget this one incident with a particular customer who came in once every 2 weeks on payday. He was a mechanic, about 30 years old or so, average looking, who'd pop in after work still wearing his greasy mechanic's coveralls and oil under his nails, buying 4 or 5 magazines and renting some pretty raunchy videos. Then, one day, he walked in all cleaned up, wearing an iron button-down shirt and clean jeans, holding a rose. He walked up to the counter where I was standing behind the cash register and said nervously, "I think you're beautiful and I would like to ask you out. Will you go to dinner with me on Saturday night?" Ew. Ugh, yeah. I tried so hard not to make a face. Was he for real? I saw the disgusting things he bought every payday. Yeah, no. I made up some lame excuse about having a boyfriend and made sure he understood my answer was a firm no. After those 2 jobs, I decided to move out of retail and try my hand at waitressing. Anyway, my point is, that was the thing about those days. There was no such thing as online ordering or streaming video or websites. If someone wanted porn, and back then, at least in my experience, it was 99.9% all men, he had to go out in public and buy it in person in the seedy back room of a, quote, specialty adult shop or adult bookstore. Or if a guy wanted to see a naked woman in action someplace besides the VCR tape on their TV, they had to go to a strip club. But juxtapose that to today. Sex is everywhere. With a click of a mouse, the tap of your phone screen, in advertisements and Netflix rentals and Instagram reels and YouTube videos. There's nothing whatsoever taboo about sex anymore. They're even talking about it and teaching it openly in elementary schools. Women are gladly forking over their integrity, their purity, and their reputations on OnlyFans for the chance to earn some big money via subscribers around the world. Sex ends up in your social media feeds, in your email spam filter, in music videos that you watch, in lyrics that you listen to, in conversations on the radio, in jokes on primetime television, in advertisements for your favorite brands, even in church. One of the last times I ever attended my big mega church in Metro Detroit, some pretty young 20-something girl showed up to service on a Sunday morning in the summertime, wearing a tank top, flip-flops, and short booty shorts with the word juicy splashed across her bum. Not being one who followed fashion trends, I had no clue back then that this was actually a brand. I had been horrified and only understood when I'd mentioned it to a friend. But geez Louise, how many old-timers or senior citizens had gone to church that day also not knowing that it was a brand? And not to mention, they were very short booty shorts. Even the gym has turned into a place where sex reigns supreme. I found this out the hard way a few years back when I was traveling for work, and the hotel I was staying at was right next door to a large gym, which provided a complimentary day pass for guests at the hotel. Feeling a bit bloated from all the restaurant fare I'd been consuming, I walked into the lobby wearing a pair of gray sweatpants and a vintage Snuffleupagus t-shirt that I'd bought at the local Goodwill, my comfy clothes that I packed for nights I stayed in to order room service and binge HGTV. Yeah, I stuck out like a sore thumb. All the women there had on shiny tight leggings in hot pink or white, with contoured sports bras that left nothing to the imagination as they did their squats with all the guys watching in admiration. I had come to realize that this was more like a pseudo bar scene than an actual place to burn off calories. I ran a few miles on the treadmill and then quickly left, feeling completely out of place. 100 years ago, in 1923, the fashion was just starting to shift from the very modest Victorian era to the more liberal Roaring 20s, when women began to wear shorter skirts and who bobbed their hair and smoked cigarettes. To illustrate the Victorian era, think Kate Winslet's character Rose from the movie Titanic. Long, elaborate dresses with corsets, big hats, or head dressings with feathers. But after World War I, women ditched the conservative styles of full-length dresses for more daring, modern styles. They embraced a lifestyle characterized by drinking, smoking, parties, dancing, casual sex, and a total disregard for social norms. If you were ever a fan of Downton Abbey, then you saw the transition of how the women dressed before the war versus after the war. And during the war, women were sometimes recruited to help out in factories or doing other jobs that men held, and that's when some of the women first began to wear pants, or trousers, they called them back then. I find it utterly and completely fascinating that up until the 1950s, when bikinis became popular beachwear, men never saw another woman's exposed body other than their wives. Can you imagine it back in the late 1800s or early 1900s? The average husband never saw a naked woman with the exception of his wife. In fact, a man living back then likely never even saw the bare legs or arms of another woman besides his wife. Sure, you could tell the basic shape of a woman, but a guy wasn't sexually tempted by the revealing booty shorts of a young lady at church, or the lure of a website that you could view incognito, or an ad plastered on a billboard of some sexy gal in a bikini selling alcohol. Nowadays, society has flooded nearly every aspect of our lives with sexuality, with the intention to be the most alluring ad, or the sexiest social media profile pic, or the hottest girl at the wedding. Every possible product or brand has used sex in its advertising, from cars and luxury brands to fast food and even candy bars. In my opinion, the whole feminist movement has created a total double standard in society. One of the cringiest examples of that was when the movie Magic Mike, starring Channing Tatum, came out several years ago. To this day, I've never seen it. But back when it came out, nearly every woman I was friends with on social media got all giddy over it, planning a girls' night out with their girlfriends so they could go and catch the movie. Same thing with 50 Shades of Grey, which I've also never seen. I am pretty sure that if a mainstream box office movie came out about female strippers made especially for men, starring big-name female actresses, all the women out there would be crying that it was misogynistic and demeaning. But even worse than TV and movies is social media. Since I was a Facebook user back in, 2005, 2006, I've seen more than my share of women posting selfies or pictures of themselves specifically to elicit approval from other guys for their looks and their sexuality. There was one gal in her late 30s that I was friends with that I'd met through a mutual friend. She was very beautiful, yet she was single. She would on occasion post on Facebook about how much she loved Christ, how her faith meant so much to her, how her church was her family. Yet she also loved posting selfies with flirtatious comments, showing off her ample cleavage or all dressed up in a slinky, sexy dress. There was one man I knew who was also friends with her. He had a wife who was not on Facebook, and he would always like and comment on this woman's photos, saying things like, "Wow, I can't stop looking," or "You're so beautiful," or "Whoever ends up with you is going to be a lucky man." I don't know if he didn't realize we could all see his comments or if he just didn't care. I found it baffling and concerning that as a Christian woman, she'd been enticing men with her salacious poses and posts. Women have spent the last decade or more using airbrushing techniques and filtering apps to make themselves more beautiful, more youthful, and more appealing with plumper lips, smoother skin, and more pronounced curves. And yet, when guys respond exactly the way they're supposed to and designed to, women stamp their feet in indignation, insisting the male population objectifies women way too much. You may remember that comment from my husband that I related in episode 33, in which I read chapter 2, The Imbalance of Self-Worth, Value, and Influence, where he said that too many women these days get their self-worth and their value from their sexuality and their physical attractiveness, even young women and teenagers. In that episode, I talked about all the young teenage girls I saw who were scantily and inappropriately dressed for their first day of school. The problem is, right now in society, we have a vicious cycle that keeps increasing in its intensity and impact. Women and even young girls feel compelled to be more sexual, to show off their physical looks, to project their attractiveness, which in turn catches the eye of men or teenage boys who lust after them. And that provides women with more attention, which superficially gives them value, so that they do it more and more, which causes men to lust more and more. And because so many men are now lusting after them with their natural desires, women can have their pick. Instead of looking for deep relationships and strong values and personality traits, they're lured by the possibility of wealth and comfort. So now, as time goes by and these women are keeping their eye out for a potential mate, they see the potential for security and financial stability amongst the masses. Some even take it a step further, capitalizing on the big business of lust and sex. No longer is it limited to the women with fake names who spend their best years underground in the porn industry. But now you've got teachers, homemakers, celebrities, and other everyday people on OnlyFans. Man, I did not even know what OnlyFans was there for the longest time. Yeah, I kind of live under a rock. If you aren't familiar with it, allow me to enlighten you. It's kind of like the YouTube of sex and porn. Anyone can create an account. They even call them creators like YouTube and other video platforms. And through this account, you can get subscribers that pay to view your video channel. If you think this is some kind of dark web, underground thing, you would be so wrong. I looked up some statistics about OnlyFans and was super shocked at what they revealed. There are currently over 2 million content creators that make videos on OnlyFans. There are over 190 million subscribers with registered accounts. And right now, 500,000, that's 500,000 new subscribers join every single day. The platform as a whole grows at a rate of about 70% per month. And last year, the platform paid out $5 billion with a B to its creators, who are mostly women. While I was just now searching for some stats, my eye caught on an article that said OnlyFans is encouraging other types of content as well, such as artists, musicians, and other talent, in order to expand its content and subscriber base. So, yeah, it doesn't take a biblical scholar to see Satan's handiwork in that whole thing. Do you remember how, in the previous chapter about negative thoughts, I'd mentioned that Jesus told his followers that hating someone was no different than committing murder? He said that because hate and murderous intentions and actions come from the same place of evil and sin within us. But guess what? In the very same Sermon on the Mount that he gave, the very next point that Jesus makes is this. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you, anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It is the exact same concept, meaning you might think as a man or as a woman that if you don't cheat on your spouse, you're upstanding and high integrity and ethical with a strong moral compass. But once again, Jesus is calling God's children to have a higher standard, to set the example for morals and ethics. And I think this is one imbalance where a lot of us fail. The reason why this is such an imbalance is because one of the most valuable treasures you'll ever have in this world that directly equates to treasures in heaven is having the opportunity to love someone else. You may already be in a marriage or relationship, or you might be single and there's a mate out there somewhere in your future. But with that relationship, God has blessed you with something very, very precious to Him: trust and intimacy. Here is why this one is an imbalance. For every woman or man out there who is either a roaming eye or wants to elicit a roaming eye, whether for the thrill of it or because it gives them a false sense of value, there is also another kind of, quote, adulterer out there who focuses more on the emotional rather than the physical. I know a few women like this. They are needy and they want attention, or they feel that their own spouse falls short. My hubby and I know a gal who's about a decade younger than us who is quite beautiful. She had been single for the longest time, and we suspected it was because she was so high maintenance. She was very sweet, but she always wore tiny dresses that showed off her cleavage, and she was always in the salon getting her hair and nails done, and she always wore high heels and sexy perfume. She also always proclaimed to be someone who adored us. Even though we didn't really know her that well, she always complimented us on our love and our strong relationship. One Saturday evening a few years back, we happened to see her at a local fair while we were there with some friends. She was dressed to the nines, of course. She wasn't sleazy or desperate looking, but rather the opposite. She honestly looked like she could be on the cover of a fashion magazine. I noticed all the guys go a bit gaga, unable to take their eyes off of her. But my hubby, who knows the value of trust and intimacy, did not shower her with looks or attention. And, not being biased here, he was the most handsome of the group. He's big and muscular and alpha, and very easy on the eyes. And right before she bid her goodbyes to head off somewhere else, she sauntered up to my hubby and wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her body up against his as she kissed his cheek goodbye. I actually didn't see this because I'd been off chatting with someone else, but he and the others told me about it. They all said it was super awkward when he pushed her away, embarrassed for her. It wasn't like she hadn't known I was there. I was only a dozen feet away. The most frustrating part of that whole scene wasn't her brazenness or any insecurity that I might have felt, but rather the disappointment in seeing her with a cross around her neck as an ambassador for Christ and an outward declaration of her faith. Was that an act of adultery or sexual immorality on her part? According to Jesus, yes, because even thinking it or wanting it is just as bad as doing it. Because the thoughts, no matter how benign or how innocent they might be to one party, would have serious consequences if acted out. James 1, verses 14 and 15 tell us that when sinful desires and enticements are conceived by the flesh, it gives birth to sin, and when fully grown, it gives birth to death. A great way to explain that for all of us gambling addicts is like me agreeing to go for a night out with some friends at the casino. Imagine me trying to justify that. It's totally innocent. I'm an online gambler, not a casino gambler. Plus, I'll be there with friends. None of those friends even know about my gambling addiction, so it would be okay. I won't even bring my credit card. I'll just bring a little cash. What can it hurt? I'm just there to socialize, really. Sure. That sin will give birth to death real fast. Many, many years ago, before I was a Christian, I had been dating this guy who seemed to be pretty cool. Dating sites had been a thing back then, like Match.com, if you all remember that. I decided to try it out because I was having a hard time meeting good marriage material men. So I set up my profile, trying to be as professional and classy as I possibly could be. So I met this guy within the first week or so of being on the site. And at first, everything seemed pretty cool. He was a professional, good-looking, and fun, and he lived nearby. He had a young son that he shared custody with, and his relationship with his ex-wife seemed amicable and drama-free. He and I dated for about 2 months, going to movies and restaurants and getting to know each other. By about week 6, though, I had started to think it strange that I hadn't met any of his family or friends. He had met a couple of my friends and even showed up to a happy hour event with my coworkers after work. When I broached the subject with him, he simply said that he wasn't ready yet, that he wanted to take things slow, which I totally respected, so I didn't press the issue. Then one Friday evening, we had plans to go out, and I told him that I'd be there around 6 p.m. He told me that he'd leave his condo door unlocked for me in case he didn't hear me knocking with the TV on. But I'd actually left work a little early and ended up pulling into his driveway at 5:30. I walked in as instructed and could hear that he was in the shower. His laptop was open on the kitchen counter, so I sat down, intending to look up our local theater to see what movies were playing at what times. But what I saw there stunned me. His browser was open to his profile on Match.com, with his inbox showing that he had several messages from other women just that day. And scrolling back, I saw that he never actually stopped interacting with other women and meeting them, and never even took down his dating profile after meeting me. I was livid. As soon as he came out of the shower, I confronted him. He didn't even have an excuse. "I can't help it," he said. "I just enjoy shopping around for other women. What if there's someone more compatible for me out there?" Wow, yeah. That explained why I never met any of his friends or family. I grabbed my purse and walked out of there, never talking to him again. I think, at the core, every single one of us just longed to be loved and adored, to be seen and understood in a very special way by a very special person. But as Gary Thomas explains in his book, there's no such thing as perfection, in relationships or in people. We are all flawed human beings. In a world filled with 8 billion people, the chances of us finding that one perfect person who exactly understands us, communicates with us, and loves us in the precise way that we want is slim to none. In gambling terms, it's like winning the lotto. We pick a person, or they pick us, and then we join in union and live out the rest of our lives with them. And it's up to us to make it something wonderful and amazing, even if that person or the seasons of our life aren't always wonderful and amazing. My husband and I are completely opposite in nearly every way. I'm cerebral and analytical, whereas he is emotional and sensitive. I'm a detail person, and he definitely is not. But he loves to imagine and dream big. One of his favorite things that he loves to do is imagine what life might be like for us a decade from now. In his mind, we've recovered and we're retired and we have some kind of windfall, and we might be able to spend our golden years traveling and sharing our faith with others, being generous with our wealth, and meeting new people to tell him our story of redemption and restoration. I, on the other hand, cannot see past tomorrow, and I'd simply be ecstatic to pay our mortgage bill next month. I love being adventurous with food, trying new cuisines and ethnic recipes. But he's a no-frills, meat and potatoes and pasta kind of guy. Sometimes our differences can create clashes and compromises. But yet, would I really want a mate that has the same character traits, the same personality, the same likes and dislikes as I do? Yikes. That would not only be totally boring, but also totally annoying. Here's a crude but effective analogy. I don't often eat ice cream. I love ice cream, but like my hubby, I'm lactose intolerant. He discovered his milk sensitivity last year, but I had always been lactose intolerant since I was a baby. But every once in a great while, especially in the heat of the summer, I'll indulge in a scoop of my favorite ice cream, which is mint chocolate chip. This summer, when my niece had been up for a visit, we stopped into our local ice cream parlor. Feeling adventurous, I decided not to go with my usual mint chocolate chip, but to get the coffee-flavored ice cream instead because I also love coffee. If I do ever deviate from mint chocolate chip, I usually go for fruit flavors like lemon or banana or mango, but never coffee. But I really like coffee flavor, so I figured why not? For the record, talk about differences in taste, my hubby thinks my taste palette is way weird. He's a butter pecan or a cookie dough kind of guy. He would never, ever consider getting mint or coffee flavored anything. Anyway, while I sat there with my niece, taking small bites of my ice cream, I realized the coffee flavor was just okay. It wasn't all that great. It tasted a bit artificial, with only light coffee taste that was far too sweet for me. Kind of like those cappuccino machines that you often see in gas stations that pump out that sickly sweet artificial coffee. Like, if you're a Gen Xer my age, remember those international coffee powders that came in the tin back in the 1990s? They had flavors like Swiss Mocha or Cafe Vienna, and they were called Austrian-style instant coffee. But I have no idea what actually made them Austrian. We all just thought we were super fancy if we had them. Even though I drank them, they tasted kind of gross to me. I'm not a big sweet tooth, although my hubby is, and they were just far too sweet for my tastes. So I sat there in the parlor with my niece while she devoured her Michigan-famous Superman ice cream, feeling a bit let down at my choice. I glanced over at the table next to me, where a couple of teenage girls were happily eating their strawberry chiffon ice cream. Would that have been a better choice? Should I ditch the rest of my coffee ice cream and choose something else? It was, at that point, a lot like a marriage, folks. I'd already made my choice. I'd have big regrets if I went back up to the counter and chose another flavor instead, costing me what I couldn't afford, making myself sick with something I knew I shouldn't have. Rather than pine for something else, regretting my choice, I needed to appreciate what was in front of me and simply enjoy the fact that I was blessed with that awesome moment of having a rare treat of ice cream with my niece. I think that many people in today's society are searching for the thing that, in all honesty, we can't find here in this life. You know that old saying, people have a God-shaped hole inside of them? It's true. We want a love that only God can give. We want the perfection that only God possesses. We want someone to know us and understand us and care about us in only the way that God can. And in that search and longing for the right kind of relationship that only God can provide, many people instead listen to the devil, and they fall into the temptation of sexual sin and adultery and divorce and broken marriages. You know, the other day, my hubby and I had been doing our Bible reading, and I was struggling with how to present this topic in a way that was both meaningful and illustrative. Sexual immorality is not even a phrase that we use these days, and yet it's super important to God. It's especially important when He's entrusted His chosen children with the mission to live pure lives, to dress modestly, to reflect His nature and hold to His standards. It just so happened that while we were reading the book of Revelation, I came upon a passage in chapter 2. In the letter Jesus wrote to the church of Thyatira, He says this to the people: I have this against you. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophet. By her teaching, she misleads my servants into sexual immorality in eating the food sacrificed to idols. I have given her time to repent of her immorality, but she is unwilling. So I will cast her on a bed of suffering, and I will make those who commit adultery with her suffer intensely, unless they repent of her ways. Wow, that seemed seriously harsh. Since I have a Life Application Study Bible with notes at the bottom of each page, I read the explanation that the study guide said. Why is sexual immorality so serious? Sex outside of marriage always hurts someone. It hurts God because it shows we prefer to satisfy our own desires in our own way instead of according to God's word, or to satisfy them now rather than according to His timing. It hurts others because it violates the commitment so necessary to our relationship. It hurts us because it can bring disease to our bodies, result in unwanted children, and adversely affect our personalities. Sexual immorality has tremendous power to destroy families, churches, and communities because it destroys the integrity on which those relationships are built. God wants to protect us from hurting ourselves and others. Thus, we are to have no part in sexual immorality, even if our culture accepts it. That is the biggest problem of all, I think. Our culture just accepts it. Society accepts sex and lust and sin like it's no big deal. The masses have believed the lie that their happiness is more important than anything, and their pleasure is the top of the list. Yet, what's saddest of all is they have no idea just how fulfilling and grounding and precious and valuable an honorable, godly relationship with another person can be. I thank God all the time for my husband. He may be flawed and he makes mistakes, but one thing he gets very right and does very well is honor our marriage. Just a few days ago, I'd walked by him while he was sitting on the couch looking at his phone, and I heard him mutter, "See ya." I paused and frowned down at him. "What?" I asked. "See who?" "Oh," he replied, "this dude I was friends with on Facebook." I didn't even really know him. I'm not sure how I was friends with him, but I just unfriended him. "Why?" I questioned. "What happened?" He shook his head. "Nothing happened. He just posted something I really didn't like that was totally inappropriate and really embarrassing to his poor wife. Here, look. The post is public, so you can still see it." It was a picture of a woman in a teeny tiny bikini with huge breasts, and he wrote something like, "This is a friend of mine. She's not only really smart and a great businesswoman, but she's also every man's dream. Isn't she gorgeous?" And my hubby showed me underneath in the comments where his wife made a remark about how she's sick of him drooling over that woman and that this chick is not his friend but a temptress. And if he doesn't stop, she's kicking him out of the house. Ouch. Oh, so cringy. And so embarrassing for his poor wife. All of this was public. The chances of this couple lasting much longer on this trajectory are pretty slim. My hubby very much values the relationship we have, even with all of my faults and the financial position I'd put us in. He knows that neither of us are perfect, but together we are made perfect in our union in Christ. I couldn't imagine going through my gambling addiction ordeal while also having to worry about him leaving me or straying or looking for a side chick. Through thick and thin, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. Satan has lied to the world that our own self-satisfaction comes first, that purity and high integrity are outdated principles, that sex and sin are perfectly acceptable as long as we follow our hearts. But Christ commanded us to follow him, not to conform to the ways of this world. One of the most beautiful gifts from God is someone that we can have intimacy with, in full trust and vulnerability. Nothing is more amazing than being given another human being to care for, to love, and to appreciate in imitation of Christ. We all know what it's like to chase losses, right? And we know that harms us. But this topic of sex, love, and intimacy is also so important to our spiritual walk because it's just as harmful when we chase longing too. When we go after the things of the devil, it opens up our lives to more spiritual attack. When we stray from God's direction and instruction in our love life, following the desires of our lust, or yearning for something more or something more fulfilling, rather than appreciating what we'd been blessed with, it will invoke correction and discipline. Have you ever seen a parent take something away from a child who wasn't taking care of it? Maybe it was a pet or a toy, or something like a car if a teenager wasn't driving properly and got a ticket, or a phone when the son or daughter was caught using it during non-phone time, or because they broke some other rule. Parents don't do that out of spite or to simply hurt the child. It's a lesson to be taught and a lesson to be learned. We want to avoid those lessons of correction and discipline. Obey God's rules. Appreciate what he gave you. Take care of those special people that he blessed us with as partners, because you don't want him taking them away from us. There's nothing worse than the regret of losing someone because you didn't cherish, respect, and value them enough. And most of all, hold yourself to a higher standard and don't go chasing or cause others to chase lust and longing and desire. Be salt of the earth, light of the world, and show the lost by example how to live according to God's will. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes of this episode to the book, Sacred Marriage: What If God Designed Marriage to Make Us Holy More Than to Make Us Happy, by Gary Thomas, if you'd like to dive into this topic further. Another terrific book on this topic is A Call to Purity: Living a Lifestyle of Purity by Richard and Brittany De La Mora. Gotta run, folks. God bless, stay safe, and I'll see you next week when I read you Chapter 8, The Imbalance of Character and Integrity.
Like holy water, like salt on a burn, rain in a drought, it's all over now. When daylight comes over the long night, open